first will be Dorothy Cordova, celebrated creator of many things with her husband, Fred, Manung Fred. They created FYA, which you'll hear a little bit about today. They also founded the National Historical Society, which there are about 45 chapters now. Huh? Oh, anyway, there's more chapters now. It's spread all over the United States. Anyway, so we'll start first with Dorothy.
I'll try to condense 94 years of living in 5 minutes. So I could talk very fast or just give indentations. What I'll really talk about changes really fast. How historical changes changed the central area. I was born and raised in the central area, went to school. All the schools I went to were within blocks of each other. Maryknoll, Immaculate, Seattle University, very close to each other. When I was born, during the Great Depression, my parents came here. They were still American nationals. 2 years later, they would now be considered aliens. We weren't supposed to own property. However, my father was a businessman, and his lawyers got us a home in the central area, the outskirts of the central area, which is Madison Valley. And so we moved into a neighborhood that was basically blue collar, and the neighbors would let their kids play with us. And it didn't matter because I come from a very large family, and we were kind of like wild kids, and we were delighted that the neighborhood was 3 houses and a woods, 3 houses and a woods, so many places to play in. And my mom would let us play when it would rain. She'd let us put on our bathing suits, and we'd run out there, take our shower out there free of charge, courtesy of God. And so it was an interesting time. And afterwards, after my father was killed, the neighbors started to let their kids play with us. And it was a fine time. This was during the Great Depression. And there were woods everywhere, and there were you could catch, we had hazelnuts and berries and everything. You just were food gatherers. And one of the games we would play in the neighborhood was let's pretend we're poor, and we were all poor. And so we would take a piece of bread and divide it and pass it out like we will share. And then the war began. First, I should go back. I went to a school that was basically Japanese, 90% Japanese, a Catholic school, Maryknoll, and 10% Filipino. So World War II starts, and things started to change drastically. My classmates were sent away to camp, and I remember when we said goodbye to them, the Filipino kids were standing outside, and the kids were in the buses, and when my friends said to me, "Don't forget me, don't forget me." And then I had to go to a school, Immaculate, which is around 5 blocks away, or 4 or 5 blocks away from Maryknoll. And it's the first time I went to school with white kids or black kids. And I remember standing there thinking, oh my God, how am I going to fit in? And thank God, from the back of the classroom, a tall black girl came walking up and shook my hand and said, "I'm glad you're here." And she became my best friend. So this was the way the central area was. What it was, the central area when I was growing up wasn't all minority. And Bob mentions the Jewish families that were there. In fact, when I was growing up, many of the businesses along Union and Yesler were basically owned by Jewish families. And Madison, where I lived on in the valley, was at the bottom of Denny. And straight up Denny, 4 blocks from 27th and Denny, was the beginning of the black neighborhood, the middle class blacks who were there. And things started to change though with World War II. The Japanese went away and people started to come to work in war industries, Boeing, the shipyards, and whatever else was there. All of a sudden, things were changing. Where are you going to put the people? We have the same problem now that we had then. As my brothers and I were walking to school, we would see garages being changed into living quarters. But what happened in our neighborhood are the woods we grew up in were cut down, and we had duplexes built. They were supposed to be temporary, but 70 years later, they're still there. And so there were the changes. And another thing that changed in our neighborhood was people who worked in war industries came from all over. And that became the influx of the blacks who are coming from down south, the Midwest. And not only that, those who were in the service decided that they would decide to stay here. So we started to change. All of a sudden, there were so many. Where were they going to live? Well, I've got to cut it back. So things progressed for a bit. The Japanese homes where people were moving into them. In 1946, they started to come back again. And our friends, they never talked about what happened. We never asked them, and they wouldn't explain to them. It was too traumatic. So the changes were there. It was different from it was in the 30s and the early 40s. And the school that I went to, Immaculate now, gradually became 40 or 50% Filipino, and maybe around 40 or 50% African Americans. Slowly, the whites moved out. And what really changed it drastically was civil rights. Starting in the 60s, people started to rightfully demand they had rights here, they're taxpayers. And the central area is right in the middle where a lot of it was happening. And so there were riots. And gradually we started to see the whites move out. The white flight was actually a thing. I never left the central area. So I was experiencing all of this. By the 70s, I was working as a researcher. And so all of this was changing. And I saw my friends leave, but then another change came about. All of a sudden, gentrification started in the central area. By around the 80s, we started to see a lot of the blacks, families, their kids have grown, and they were moving out. And houses were being torn down, and big edifices were going up called condos. It's not the same. Where I used to see kids playing, I started to see young people walking with their very expensive dogs. And it's a different world. I look around, I see some of the people who come out of the central area. It's not the same. And so in a sort of a brief thing, I think what happens is all of us are touched by historic events. And it just doesn't happen in a history book or in a newspaper headline. It touches you. And in FANHS, that's what we try to do. We tell the story, but how did it affect the individuals who are living at that particular time? And so, is that 5 minutes, Bob? Or is it more? So I think I've used up my 5 minutes. And I don't know, maybe...
Go for it, Angie.
And you can have 5 more.
I have 5 more.
Yeah, you have a second chance.
Okay. I condensed it. All right, so, okay, so I will talk about, let me talk about this. The central area was really central to, I was talking about everything. The central area was part of my life. It still is. I never left it, really, in a way, even though I live outside, live closer to the Arboretum now. At one time during civil rights, where I lived was the tail end of model cities, where the tail is, but that doesn't count. But I worked there, and I've worked there a long time. We started the Filipino youth activities in the central area. We did a lot of things there. We started FANHS, And a lot of it was Central area stuff. We started to gather the history of people who lived in the Central area. It wasn't a matter, tell us what you did, because were you important? No. They were important to us because they were the base of history. They were the people who actually lived the history. And that was so important to us. What did you do? How did you feel? Why did you come? You know, and where did you live and how were you treated? That to me was the most important part of gathering the history. When I talk about what was happening, we have to talk about the changes and how it changed us. Over the years, what happened in the Central area is after World War II, we started to see the coming of what we refer to as the white Filipinos, okay? The white Filipinos were those in the Philippines who came from the Philippines. They could come, some of them actually came as the war was ending on military ships down in the holds because their fathers or grandfathers were Americans who stayed in the Philippines after the Spanish-American War. By virtue of their American fathers or grandfathers, they too were Americans. And so they were allowed to come here without a passport. So that's historical. And then the men who were in the service, the 1st and 2nd Filipino Infantry, they started to come in with their war brides, and that's Emily's family. And so that started to build up the Central area. Then another group came in a few years later. Those were the Baton Corregidor survivors. By around 1950, they were bringing their families over. So the Central area, for a while, for around 15, 20 years, there were a lot of Filipino families living there. And now they're gone. So life goes on.
Okay.
You lived there. You grew up there. Bob lived there. My 5 minutes over?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's okay. I'm going to have you come back.
Two of the gentlemen here who spoke, or actually three of them, represented the way our community was before. And when I was growing up, most of the families were mixed. It was interracial. And unlike what people say that anti-miscegenation laws was everywhere, it wasn't. It was in California and most Western states except state of Washington and I think it was one other down the deep south. I mean, down next to Alabama, next to Arizona. So Sonny and Bob and even you're. So that was our community. We had a mixed race. We were everybody. It seemed like the only people we weren't able to intermarry with at that time, prior to World War II, were Filipinos, were Chinese. Even though in the Philippines there was a lot of that. So there's a lot of things. For us to declare that we were Filipinos at a time that they could say they were something else was really, to me, rather extraordinary. Because some people tried to pass, but most of them stayed. I think one thing they mentioned also, we have pictures that shows the old days where most of the families, there were the white mothers, the Native American mothers, some black mothers. That was our community. In California, it was Mexican. And so when you think of Filipino American history, we have to also acknowledge the fact that there are many types of people who made up the great big diaspora that we talk about. It was many people. And when you think about the Philippines, we're mixed race there too, because people forever would always say to me, "What are you?" And I said, "I'm Filipino." And their comment to me all the time from the Philippines is, "You don't look like a Filipino." And I would think in my brain, well, you don't look like my type of Filipino either. So anyway, I just thought I'd throw that out. If people want to talk about being Filipino and mixed, okay?